Good day, folks. Welcome to Andrew's Life. I hope everyone's doing great today. We're going to have an honest discussion about moving somewhere cheaper, where cost of living is lower. We're going to have an honest discussion about that. Is it truly a good idea to move somewhere where cost of living is lower? Now, most of you are going to answer that question, and you're going to answer that question in an astounding yes. Now, if somebody were to ask me that question, now back when I was younger, I would have also answered yes. I would say even a few years ago, I would have most likely answered yes. But the more that I familiarize myself with different parts of this country, the more that I realize how different the cost of living could be from one state to another. If somebody were to ask me, Andrew, do you think it's a good idea for me to move somewhere where the cost of living is lower? My answer would be it depends. Because it does depend. Like when you look at it, sometimes when you move somewhere because the cost of living in that state might be lower, sometimes you get what you pay for. And I don't mean that in a good way. Now let me break down what I'm talking about here. Let's say, in the best example I can give you is use myself as an example. Now, for starters, no, I did not move here to Alabama from Indiana due to cheaper cost of living. Now, although the cost of living in Alabama, at least in the part of Alabama where I'm living, yes, the cost of living is considerably less compared to most of Indiana. That's not the reason why I moved to Alabama. But hypothetically speaking, that I mean, let's pretend that I don't know, I was still living in Indiana. And I wanted to move to Alabama strictly because the cost of living was lower. Let's pretend that was the case. Now, the question then is, would it be a good idea for me to leave Indiana and then move to Alabama for a lower cost of living? I'm going to tell you guys straight up, the answer would be no. No, I would not move to Alabama from Indiana strictly because of lower cost of living. And let me tell you why. And none of these are in any particular order. For starters, let's talk about the wages. Now, yes, housing prices in Indiana are a little bit more expensive compared to most of Alabama. Yes, your property tax rates are gonna be, I would say, double to triple compared to the tax rates here in Alabama. And of course, for the dollar, you're gonna get you're not gonna get as much house up in Indiana as you will down here. And also up in Indiana, it's not going to be as easy to find land as it is to find land down here. And if you and whatever land you find up in Indiana, you're going to pay significantly more money than you would if you were to buy land down here. At least where I'm at. At least where I'm at, yeah. However, one thing which I would have to take into consideration would be the wages. Like the wages down here in Alabama are considerably less compared to Indiana. Now, without telling you guys exactly what kind of money I make or what kind of money I used to make back when I was living up in Indiana, I would say, in my case, for the same line of work, like the line of work I did up in Indiana, if I were to come down here and do that same line of work, I would be making $4 an hour less. I would be making, yeah, I would be making, I'll just say $3 to $5 an hour less. Which, if you do the math on that, trust me, the shit adds up. So that's for starters. So yeah, my cost of living here in Alabama would be cheaper, but my wages will also be significantly lower. And if I were to do the math on that all by itself, despite the fact that my cost of living would be a little more up in Indiana compared to where I'm at down here, financially, and I'm gonna keep it all the way real, financially, I would actually be doing better if I was still up in Indiana. I'm gonna just keep it all the way real. Because for those of you guys that are looking at moving somewhere because it's cheaper, I don't want you to go somewhere because it's cheaper, and then when you get there, you find out that yeah, it's cheaper, but it's not cheaper. If you understand where I'm coming from, and I'm gonna try to clarify all this throughout the video. Now, here's another thing that I would have to consider when it comes to Alabama. Now, when I was living up in Indiana, the infrastructure in Indiana is better than Alabama's infrastructure. It just is. And let me give you guys an example. Now, up in Indiana, uh, we have, well, Indiana, like up in Indiana, even if I were to live somewhere in a super small town, or if I were to live somewhere out in the country, kind of like where I'm at here in Alabama, the internet services up in Indiana were better. They're way better. Like up in Indiana, there's a lot of places in rural Indiana where I still I still would have had access to fiber. As we're here in Alabama, I don't have fiber. In fact, I got dish. My internet right now is a satellite dish, which means a half hour video is gonna take me, I'll just say 2 to 3 hours to upload on YouTube. And if we get any rain, if we get a thunderstorm or a shower or any of that type of stuff, it could take me in upwards of 4 to 5 hours to upload a half hour video. As we're up in Indiana, I could I would have access to fiber, and it wouldn't matter whether it was sunny and clear skies or if it was a torrential downpour outside or a thunderstorm. It wouldn't make up in Indiana. It wouldn't make a difference. It wouldn't matter whether it was a complete snowstorm blizzard outside. It wouldn't make a difference. A half hour video would upload in 20 to 25 minutes, no matter what the weather outside would be up in Indiana. As we're down here, it takes, like I said, it could take an upwards of 5 hours. Because right now, the only type of internet that's available where I'm at is Dish. And that's basically how it is in, I would say, at least the majority of Alabama. Now, if you're in here in Alabama, if you live in one of the cities, your internet services will typically be significantly better. But but when you leave the city limit and you move out in the county, then the quality of your internet is gonna decline significantly. As we're up in Indiana, even if in some cases, depending on what county that you live in, Yeah, that could be the case as well. But even if it were the case, the quality of your internet up in Indiana, even out in the rural parts of the state, are still a lot better than here in rural Alabama. Like, I'm gonna give you guys another example about the internet. About the internet. Like, if I was up in Indiana, just driving around, I could go up to Indiana and drive in the absolute middle of nowhere. And I mean in the middle of nowhere. And I would still have a fairly strong signal on my cell phone. As we're here in Alabama, if I get any more than 5 minutes outside of town or outside of the city, my my signal on my phone will go to about nothing. I will have no signal. I will not be able to make no calls. I will not have access to my internet. I'll have nothing. And another thing is, let's talk about healthcare. Now, Indiana, compared to other states, may not have the best healthcare, but compared to the healthcare in Alabama, Indiana's got better healthcare. And as you get older, being somewhere with good healthcare could be very important, especially if you got any type of health conditions. Fortunately, I don't have any, and I'm hoping that the universe blesses me with that. But I'm just saying, the healthcare up in Indiana is better than the healthcare here in Alabama. In fact, Alabama is compared to the research of others, the healthcare in Alabama is among the worst in the country. So that's another thing you gotta look at when you look at moving somewhere because cost of living is lower. You gotta look at the healthcare. How is the quality of healthcare gonna be? And another thing you gotta look at is now. So yeah, you got healthcare, and let's see what else. Let's talk about amenities. Let's talk about amenities, specifically grocery stores. Now, one thing which I miss about living up in the one thing I miss about living up in Indiana is I didn't have to go shopping at Walmart for my food. I went to Myers. Now, here in Alabama, if you want a slightly better quality produce, we got Publix, which Publix is a complete ripoff. And lately, the quality of a lot of their produce hasn't been all that great, in my humble opinion. But Myers has the same quality, like the produce at Myers, in my opinion, is the same quality, if not better, than Publix. I mean, their variety at Myers is about the same, again, if not better, compared to Publix. And Myers is also a lot cheaper compared to Publix. It's a little bit more than Walmart, but it's a hell of a lot cheaper than Publix. And that's one thing I miss about Indiana was the ability to do my shopping at Myers, because Myers, they got, their produce is good quality. Their meats are, for the most part, they're good quality. They're better quality than Walmart. And their customer service is also better than Walmart too. Now, here in Alabama, you know, we got Walmart and Publix. Now, of course, we also got Piggly Wiggly. We got Piggly Wiggly, and depending on what region of Alabama you reside in, you might have a food giant, and you might have some other smaller local or regional food chain stores, which unfortunately places like Piggly Wiggly are a ripoff. They're a ripoff. Like sometimes at Piggly Wiggly, I can find some good produce, but other times I go in and their produce is complete trash. I mean, their oranges are overripe, their apples are all bruised, and a lot of the other groceries that they have are way overpriced. I mean, they're just a ripoff in my opinion. So I say all this to say that although the cost of living in Indiana might be a little more compared to living here in Alabama, the quality of your groceries up in Indiana are better, in my opinion. The quality of your groceries up in Indiana are better, and they're a little cheaper at the same time. And another thing is, well, I don't have any kids, so this is something I don't have to concern myself with. But another thing you gotta look at is the education system. Now, yeah, you gotta look at the education system because sometimes when you move somewhere strictly because it's cheaper, again, you get what you pay for. As they say, you get what you pay for. And of course, I'm not saying that in a positive way. And another thing you gotta be mindful of is you gotta also bear in mind the quality of many of your cities, the quality of many of even your smaller towns. Like I'm gonna give you guys an example. I mean, now up in Indiana, my favorite city is Fort Wayne. Now I wish to hell that Fort Wayne was not up in Indiana. I wish that we can have a Fort Wayne here in Alabama because I like Fort Wayne, Indiana. I really do. I like the people. I like the atmosphere. The economy up there is solid. There's plenty of employment opportunities up there. And in my opinion, Fort Wayne is a well put together and ran city. Now, unfortunately, here in Alabama, we don't have any cities comparable to Fort Wayne. Now, some of you might be thinking, well, yeah, we do. We got Huntsville. And Huntsville, although it might be the best ran major city in the state of Alabama, Huntsville, in my opinion, still does not compare to Fort Wayne. I mean, well, I mean, maybe it does. Maybe it does. But, and I guess in this case, I'm going to be a little biased when it comes to comparing Huntsville, Alabama to Fort Wayne, Indiana. Now, in my humble opinion, if you gave me a choice of which city, like if I had only two choices of which city for me to move to, I can either move to Fort Wayne or I can move to Huntsville, Alabama. I would take Fort Wayne over Huntsville, Alabama any day. I'm gonna keep it all the way real. So for those of you that are from Huntsville, Alabama, or you live in North Alabama, and you're watching my video, you're a little salty right now. I don't know what to tell you. Just wipe the salt off the shoulder and keep it moving. You know what I'm saying? Cause you'll be alright. You know what I'm saying? You'll be alright. But I would take Fort Wayne, Indiana over Huntsville, Alabama any day. That's just me. I like Fort Wayne. Huntsville, Alabama, that city's alright, but it's not. I mean, it's definitely not one of my favorite cities. I'm gonna just keep it real. I'm gonna just keep it real. So here in Alabama, we don't have a city that's ran as well as Fort Wayne. So although compared to Birmingham, Montgomery, and Mobile, the cost of living in Fort Wayne is going to be more expensive. But then again, Fort Wayne is also a better ran city with a larger economy and therefore more employment opportunities compared to most of your cities here in Alabama. Not to mention that your wages up there are also significantly better too. So when you look for a place, when you look at moving somewhere because it's cheaper, obviously you gotta bear in mind the economy. For those of you that work a regular 9 to 5 job, or for those of you that run a regular brick and mortar business. And also to add to the quality of major cities, even if you don't live in a major city, it's always like if you live, let's say, in a smaller community within an hour of a major city, it's still good to, it's still good for that city, for that major city to be a decent city, even though you may not live in that city, even though you might be an hour away. Like guys, is like for an example, if I were to like, it's been a minute since I've done any door dashing, but and I'm thinking about going back to door dashing at least part time just to make a little extra money. And I'm gonna be honest, I enjoyed door dashing up in Fort Wayne. I enjoyed it because up in Fort Wayne, I mean, for one, the people were nice. Secondly, I got tipped pretty well. Thirdly, the city was fairly easy to navigate. And I would say, for the most part, I felt safe. Even in the quote unquote hoods of Fort Wayne, I still felt safe. As where if I were to DoorDash in like Montgomery, Alabama, which I've had plenty of times, although nothing bad happened to me in Montgomery. See, when it comes to Montgomery, Alabama, I will not DoorDash at night. I used to, but I don't. I would not do it at night no more, just because of the crime in Montgomery. As where if I'm DoorDashing in Fort Wayne, I'm not saying that Fort Wayne is free of crime because it certainly isn't. They got their issues too. But I would feel 10 times more comfortable DoorDashing at night up in Fort Wayne than I would in Montgomery, Alabama, or or Mobile or Birmingham, Alabama as well. So again, if I had a choice of which city to DoorDash in, Fort Wayne would be my top pick. I would pick Fort Wayne over any city in Alabama, period, even to include Huntsville. And that's what I mean by the quality of your major cities. Now, even when I look at Indianapolis, Indiana, which right now that city is just a complete mess, if you ask me. But even Indianapolis, even if I were to compare Indianapolis to most of the cities here in Alabama, I'm gonna say I would say that if I was door dashing full time and I had a choice in the matter, if I'd rather door dash in Indianapolis over the cities here in Alabama, over the major cities here in Alabama. Now, some of you might be asking why, and I'm going to tell you right now why. Well, for starters, again, I actually feel a little safer even in Indianapolis than I would in cities like, let's say, Mobile or Birmingham. Secondly, the people up in Indianapolis tip a little better. Thirdly, the city of Indianapolis, at least to me, is easier for me to navigate compared to Montgomery, compared to Birmingham or Mobile. Now maybe that's because I'm from Alabama, so I'm not used to a lot of the cities here in Alabama. It could be that, I'm not gonna lie. But at this point, I'm just doing a comparison here. So again, the cost of living up in Indiana might be a little more expensive than here in Alabama. Well, at least in most of Alabama. But again, when I do gig work, I tend to make more money up in Indiana than I do down here. And since I'm able to navigate the roads up there a little easier, oh, and another thing that I almost forgot. The traffic lights up in Indiana are a lot shorter compared to the traffic lights here in Alabama. Like here in Alabama, if you get caught at a light, like if you like in many of your major cities here in Alabama, if you get caught at a light, it seems like it's forever in a lifetime before that light turns green. As where if I get caught at a light in Fort Wayne or Indianapolis, okay, I might be there for like a minute or so, and then that light turns green, and I keep it moving, and and I'm good. So, and when you do gig work in the city, to where your lights stay red for a shorter period of time, and your streets are easier to navigate, guess what happens? You get your deliveries done quicker. You make more money. And on top of that, like I said, people up in Indiana tip me more and they tip me better than they do here in Alabama. So I make more money even doing gig work up in Indiana than I make here in Alabama. So, and, I mean, and let me see if I can think of anything else to discuss here. Well, at this point, I can't. And I don't want to make this video too terribly long. I want to try to keep this video at a half hour or shorter. So, those are just a few examples of why I would not. Like, I'll put it to you guys like this. Those examples I just shared with you guys are examples why I would not have moved here to Alabama for a lower cost of living. Like I told you at the beginning of the video, I moved here to Alabama because A, I like the climate here better. B, I prefer to be close. I prefer to be not super far from many of your vacation spots by the beaches, close to the beaches and everything. And when it comes to the lower cost of living here in Alabama, to me, that's kind of like the cherry on top of the ice cream. It's not the main reason, but it's a cherry on top of the ice cream. But if I wanted to move somewhere strictly because of lower cost of living, I would not have came here to Alabama. I would have just stayed up. I would have just stayed up my happy self up in Indiana. So when you look at moving somewhere due to a lower cost of living, those are the type of things you gotta think about. I mean, depending on what type of work you do, depending on rather or rather not you have kids, depending on a lot of other variables, you gotta think about all that type of stuff. You might have to get a paper and you might have to get a pen and a notepad and just kind of write everything down and do some thinking. Do some brainstorming. Sit down with your significant other and just talk about it. Because sometimes moving to a place because the cost of living is cheaper, well, once you get there, it may not actually be cheaper by the time you factor in the lower wages, the lower quality of life, the not as good health care, the not as good school system, and also in some cases the lack of quality amenities, the lack of grocery stores that sell quality produce. So those are things you gotta think about when it comes to moving somewhere because the cost of living is lower. So I would say sometimes in certain cases, moving somewhere because the cost of living is lower, yeah, it might work. It might be a logical solution to to improve your finances. But I would say in other situations, not so much so. So is it good to move somewhere for a lower cost of living? Is moving somewhere for a lower cost of living going to help with their finances? Like I told you at the beginning of the video, it depends. And all those examples I gave you were all examples of how it all depends. And I'm not gonna lie to you guys. I mean, do I get homesick? Of course I do. And another thing which I want to point out is now, for those of you guys that have been following me, I've been out here looking for a job in the same line of work I currently do right now, except I prefer to work second shift as opposed to working in the mornings. If I was still living up in Indiana, I would have been had me a second shift job doing the line of work that I desire to do. As we're here in Alabama, since the economy is slower and smaller, it's not as easy for me to find the type of job that I want that will work me the shift that I prefer. As where if I was still up in Indiana, all this would have been much easier. And another thing that I noticed about Indiana compared to Alabama, at least from my experience, is up in Indiana, the interview process is a little different. Like up in Indiana, when you get interviewed for a position, the interviews, for the most part, at least from my experience, the interviews are they're quicker. They're a little more to the point. The majority of the questions that they ask you pertain to whether or whether not you can do the job. As we're here in Alabama, they'll get to asking you a whole bunch of personal questions that don't even pertain to the job that you applied for. And then maybe towards the end of the interview, they might ask you a couple of questions that directly pertain to the job. So when it comes to the interview process up in Indiana is a lot quicker. It's more direct. It's more to the point. As we're down here, they like to play around a little too much. So those are all things that you need to take into consideration before you move somewhere. And that's why I tell you guys, before you move somewhere permanently, go somewhere, rent you an apartment for maybe 6 months, get you a hotel and rent that for a few months, or before you even do that much. Wherever you think you want to move to where the cost of living may be cheaper, check the job market out and see what the pay is and see what you have to go through, see what type of hoops and hurdles you might have to jump through in order to get a job in some of these states to where the cost of living is lower. So hopefully you guys got something out of this video. And in closing, before you choose to jump the gun and move somewhere where the cost of living is lower, take into consideration all the inconveniences, all the setbacks that you will most likely have to deal with in order to have that lower cost of living. And another question is that lower cost of living going to be truly lower by the time you take other things into consideration, such as lower wages and potentially higher cost for lower quality health care? So that's all I got for you guys. This video is long enough. Hopefully you guys got something out of it. Stay blessed. Catch you guys on the next one. Be careful out there.